Welcome to On Docs, a podcast about documentaries and the stories they tell. I'm Colin Ellis.
And I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Joining us today is director Karen Cho and Rick Wong, a member of the Longtime No See Collective. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Today we're here to talk about Karen's film Big Fight in Little Chinatown, which tells the story of how Chinatowns across the globe are disappearing and how communities are fighting back.
From New York, Montreal, Vancouver, and right here in Toronto, these communities are fending off developers and gentrification to save their heritage. Karen, before we get into our conversation, what's the response been like so far with the documentary?
Well, it's been great. You know, it's a real special film, and we're actually bringing the film back into Chinatown. So we've started this kind of coast to coast tour, and we've been playing in different cities. So the response has been amazing. Like, to me as a filmmaker, I think the best feedback you can get is when folks who are in the film or in the community, they tell you, they watch the film and they say, yeah, that's our story. Mm-hmm. And you've done something well when the community takes the film and they kind of run with it themselves. And that's in a way what's happening with these screenings. We're kind of leveraging the screenings in the communities for the organizers on the ground to kind of use it for the work that they're doing every day.
Speaking of people who are in the film, here's one of your subjents. Rick, how did you get involved in this?
My wife kind of started this project. We went around during COVID when we're at the depths of it. I don't know if you remember that time. You weren't allowed to talk to anybody. You weren't allowed to see your friends and all this kind of stuff. And we went around in the wintertime and we're chatting with our friends on their porches. And Chinatown was being hit really hard by COVID at that time. It had anti-masker protests going through and bullying all the seniors and stuff like that, ongoing basis. One of my Kung Fu students got spit on and things like that. Stores were closing. Our local herbalist was saying, we might throw in the towel on this. And meanwhile, developers are coming in and buying up sections of Chinatown for stores that are closing down. They're trying to amalgamate blocks. They're doing 315 Spadina, which is tearing out a huge area of Spadina and building this thing. And my wife was saying, well, Chinatown's more than just the real estate. Chinatown is the people. So we did this project called Longtime No See, Mogin Honoi, which it was an expression from her mother used to use. Coming into Chinatown, she'd see an old friend and it'd be like, you're alive, I'm alive, and we look at each other's faces, right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite poetic. And at that time, everybody's running around like this, like nobody can see anybody's face. So it's like giving face. So we extended that out to people taking selfies in Chinatown and talking about their emotional attachment to Chinatown. Now, through that, one of the members of our group is Sandy Yep, and Sandy is a member of the group, which is the house that he was born in Montreal. Had been bought by a developer who's known in Montreal, Chinatown, for buying properties and ripping them down and building condos. And this is right. Karen will talk to you more about this, but it's in the film, right in the heart of Chinatown. So Sandy had made a connection with Karen. So while we were out postering, Karen came down and started filming us postering as part of the story of what are communities doing to save their community? What are they doing? And for us, it was like, we're not just real estate, we're people here. Hey, there's people here, and not just people that are just happen to be here, people that actually have a strong emotional attachment to this neighborhood and that are willing to put themselves on the line for this, right? Like, hey, willing to stand up and actually do that. And we had over 200 posters. And it was all printed on some borrowed printers, and it was all done with wheat paste that we cooked on our stoves. We had no funding. It was all done as a community art project, and that's how I got involved in the project with Karen. Karen came down, filmed, and just as part of the story of what are people doing to try to save their community.
I love what you said too about it's not just real estate, because as the film further in the documentary, there's kind of like a sentiment that Chinatowns were a response to the anti-Asian hate. They became havens for people from China. And then now, because of the real estate, it's kind of like hurting those communities. And first and foremost, it is about the people.
Yeah. I think it's kind of the colonial project to displace less powerful communities if they're sitting on a resource. It's like, well, you don't realize that's a resource. Like, oh, it's a burial ground. Too bad. Like, or whatever, right? It's just part of the ongoing process that no, money's the most important. But I don't believe that. I think if we want to talk about quality of life, or who gets to live in the city and what the city looks like, or how do you make a livable city, money isn't the only thing in that equation. You have to think about quality of life.
Karen, the title, Big Fight in Little Chinatown. There's a movie called Big Trouble in Little Chinatown, directed by John Carpenter. Was that kind of an inspiration for you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a kind of tongue-in-cheek reference to that film. I mean, besides from that, it's not necessarily the same thing, but it's something that sticks. A lot of people call my film Big Trouble or Big Fight in Little China. But it's a good way of kind of getting people who are maybe Googling something else to fall on this film as well.
Well, we have a clip from Big Fight in Little China. Here's the clip.
This is where you can put a freeway through Vancouver's Chinatown to obliterate it.
If you want to get rid of the Chinese, you train your bullseye, your target, onto Chinatowns.
In the face of all the economic pressure due to COVID, due to anti-Chinese racism, developers, they come in, they prey on all these type of vulnerabilities. And if we don't fight back, if we don't organize as a community, that's how we're going to lose everything.
Karen, if you can set it up for the history for us a little bit, how did Chinatown come to be in places like Toronto, New York, and elsewhere?
Well, I mean, everywhere in the world, actually, like Chinatowns are they're the result of the Chinese diaspora, and they're neighborhoods that are born out of racism. In Canada, I mean, it's 2023, we're the 100th year anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. There were lots of immigration laws against the Chinese here in Canada. I'm fifth generation Chinese Canadian. My family goes back to the beginnings of when the Chinese came here for the gold rush, for the railway. But there were, we weren't ever wanted as a population, so they put head taxes on us, different laws and different things that in a way corralled the Chinese into one neighborhood or one area, which was often the most undesirable area of the neighborhood or of the city at that time. And so Chinatown for us has always been a neighborhood of sanctuary and a neighborhood of finding your own family, because we weren't allowed to bring, our wives here. At one point, the idea behind those laws were so the Chinese wouldn't remain, they wouldn't have children, they wouldn't have families. So in a way, Chinatown itself becomes a de facto family for the folks who were here. Like they used to be bachelor places. And the family societies that were there at the very beginnings as mutual aid societies in an era where we couldn't have bank accounts or medical services continue to be in the Chinatowns today.
Rick, we were talking before in the green room. I grew up in Chinatown, but I wouldn't be able to tell you that I learned this history in school. I'm pretty sure, it was not something that we were taught growing up. So I'm wondering, how aware do you think people are about this history of like the Chinese head tax and Chinese Exclusion Act, which you just mentioned is the 100th anniversary this year? How aware are people of this history?
I think that section of Canadian history is completely overlooked. I mean, I never learned any of that when I was in school. I actually did first-year history at Western. I mean, so I actually, all of that stuff you have to dig for. Even finding about, we did this project out in Markham right now, connecting the suburban Chinatown to downtown Chinatown and making the connections. And even most recent Chinese immigrants who come here, and when I talk to them about the Exclusion Act, and I talk to them about this being a commemoration for that, a lot of them have no idea of the history of racism in the country, or the history of immigration law, or the history of First Nations on the land. I mean, it's coincidental to that. Only by researching the 1923 and the Chinese Exclusion Act, as I found out that the area in Markham, the Williams Treaties were all signed in 1923, the exact same year. The treaties were so slanted away from the First Nations, they had to do an apology in 2018 and a $1.1 billion settlement with that. All of those things I found out all on my own, reading through stuff. The history of all of that is completely missing out of that.
What have Chinatowns become now with everything that's happening around gentrification?
Well, I mean, Chinatown continues to be a place for marginalized communities, be they Chinese Canadian, low income. There's lots of folks with, experiencing houselessness or with mental health or drug addiction issues also in the Chinatown. So they continue to be places where a bunch of marginalized communities coexist together. Gentrification, there's lots of gentrification pressures in all of the historic urban Chinatowns because they're located in the downtown core of so many cities. So there's a history of, expropriation, urban renewal and development that happened over decades that expropriated a lot of land in Chinatown that kind of tore the communities apart. There's the modern day gentrification pressures, big box store kind of pressures, luxury condo pressures. But then, of course, COVID happened as well. And COVID came down especially brutally in Chinatowns. The neighborhoods were stigmatized, the banquet style eating that happens in Chinatown, the gathering places, all of those things couldn't happen during COVID. So the neighborhood was essentially abandoned, emptied. And, it was also it created a perfect storm for developers to kind of come in and scoop up properties, assemble land and kind of clear out what was there. And, Rick talking about the treaties of the past and this idea of land also, there's this thing that happens like terrace nullis, like you arrive in a place, there's nothing there. So for us, that obviously that's the colonial story, like arriving here on this land we're calling Canada, as if there's nothing there. But today in Chinatown, like developers arrive in our neighborhoods and pretend there's nothing there. Like in our Montreal, and it's in the film, there's a moment where a reporter asks, well, these luxury condos, they're not marketing it as if they're in Chinatown? And they're not,
There's that surprise, like that's happening in Chinatown.
And literally, like the people on the third floor of these quote unquote luxury condos can hang their laundry on the Chinatown gate. It's that close, right? Wow. And they're pretending they're in a neighborhood that's a quote unquote luxury neighborhood in the heart of downtown, right near the old port in the case of Montreal. Well, that neighborhood exists. It's called Chinatown, and it's been there for over 150 years, and so have the people that are in that neighborhood.
In a lot of the promotion of those new condo complex, it doesn't mention it's Chinatown.
No. There's not one word, okay, on Chinatown, and that's very worrisome. We're worried about being wiped out.
So, people think about condos, how they can revitalize a new neighborhood, bring in more density, bring in more vibrancy. Yes, but if you're marketing it as a place that exists in some fictitious neighborhood in downtown and you forget that there's amazing culture and food and people there already, and the people who are buying these new condos are marketed some other thing, do you think they're going to frequent Chinatown and be part of the community and put down roots in the community? So it was an active erasure of the story of and the narrative and the existence of our neighborhood in the city in the present as well.
It's interesting to me that they would not want to market it as Chinatown, because I mean, like I said, I grew up downtown Chinatown. I was proud of it. Like, I love living in Chinatown. It's just like there's everything that you could possibly need there. You would think that would actually be an attractive thing to advertise to people, but I guess I wonder why these developers would look at it differently.
Well, I mean, it goes back to some of the old stigmas that exist, even with my father's generation of the neighborhood. And, Mike Tan in the film kind of talks about this idea of, there's a certain era of folks where Chinatown was the ghetto. It had this kind of stigma of being a dirty place, being an unsafe place. And, you want to go out to the suburbs where everything is shiny and beautiful. So I think a lot of the luxury condos are maybe buying into that idea. It's just shiny new people, shiny new buildings. Mm-hmm. Whereas you're right, like where are the places when we visit a city that we want to visit the most? Like here in Toronto, Chinatown, Kensington Market, these places that are human scale, that are walkable, that are affordable, but that also have that kind of human cachet and that vibrant life on the street. It's not a strip mall in the suburbs. It's not a mall, or a bunch of like chain kind of stores that you can find anywhere. These are entrepreneurs, like mom and shop pops. They have a character, they have a meaning, and there's a kind of layered memory in the space as well. And those are the neighborhoods in every city that we remember, we want to visit most and actually have the most authenticity because of it.
So much history is there, but you mentioned that COVID was very hard on Chinatowns because people couldn't go to the restaurants. There's a lot of businesses there, and now developers are able to come into position and offer hundreds of millions of dollars to building owners in Chinatown. One architect was even quoted in the film as saying he had never actually been to Chinatown in the city, so he didn't really see a use for it. Rick, how much are developers to blame in pushing these communities out?
I think the idea that in order to house more people in Toronto, we need to destroy neighborhoods and rebuild them, right? I think there's this ongoing thing that we need more housing. So I agree, we need more housing. I'm not disagreeing with that. But you've got an existing neighborhood which is not it's not a low density neighborhood already. It's actually one of the higher density neighborhoods in downtown Toronto. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to take that and you're going to destroy it, what you replace it with is buildings at a higher income level. So then what happens to all those people that are there now, right? And all their relationships and all the rooming houses and all this sort of stuff. You want to house them better, but at the same time, if you don't make accommodation for that, they're going to be homeless, right? Or you're going to try to export them all out to the fringe suburbs where you end up having to buy a car and all this sort of stuff. So I'm not
You
opposed.
lose community too, right?
And then the government has to step in to replace that community, but it's always, well, that's the first thing that gets cut on a cutback, and it can't be done as well. Like seniors is a really important issue. Seniors were the hardest hit group during COVID. But Chinatown is hugely supportive to seniors. If you talk to seniors, they all want to get into the very few housing projects that house seniors in downtown. Their friends are there. They can walk to stores. There's social events that are all around. If you take these seniors and you pop them into a building out in Mississauga, they're isolated. They can't go for a walk and get groceries and all these kind of things. They lose all those social connections. And then you have to, the expensive thing is, well, you could get a government agency to come in and take them and drive them around. It just doesn't work that way. The neighborhood is actually a functioning, living, breathing thing, which is going on. So I'm not opposed to development, but I think they really have to take that into consideration. That's a super important part of it. And I think one of the problems with development is that in order to make a project feasible, the larger the project, the more efficient. I mean, that's the same with big box stores. It's the same. It's the reason we only have 5 grocery chains and 3 telecom carriers and blah, blah, blah. This amalgamation where bigger is always better. Well, bigger isn't always better. And for me, one of the nicest things about the neighborhood is the small lot sizes. I mean, Kensington Market, for example, by having all that diversity of smaller units, it allows a whole bunch of different ideas to try, right? There's entry points where people can go into, and I just think that they're squeezing all that out and turning it into kind of a monoculture, and I think that's the problem with the development model.
There's another issue that your film presents, which is this younger generation that may not want to take over their mom and dad's restaurant. It's it's hard work. Obviously, COVID had a huge effect on these businesses lasting. How is that affecting these communities?
Well, I mean, for sure, Chinatown is built on immigrant labor. And when you're immigrants, you work really hard. Like the Chinatown kind of, restaurant model, it's 16 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's hard work. And a lot of folks don't want their next generation to be doing that. But, just because a second generation is there in the business doesn't mean the business also has to be kind of locked in time, right? It can evolve. You can breathe new life into old things. So, Mei Lam, who's in the film, I specifically look for intergenerational businesses in the film because they had such a strong place in the history of the neighborhood, but also in the future. And these kind of younger generations in the family that were taking over the business were breathing new life and new ideas into those concepts, So Mei Lam out of Wing On Wo in New York, Wing On Wo is literally the oldest storefront in New York's Chinatown. It's from 1890. They sell porcelain today. Back in the day, it was like a general store post office for, Chinese workers who weren't literate, and they had a letter writer to write home to the family village. And then it's evolved into a porcelain store. And today, May, out of the basement of that shop, also runs this amazing thing called the WOW Project. And that's, she has, it's like an artist residency for young Asian American artists and also artists from the LGBTQ plus community to come and to create culture in the neighborhood, be a part of that neighborhood and part of the cultural production of that neighborhood. So in a way, the oldest thing in the neighborhood is actually bringing the most vibrant and new life, and also bringing new community and new groups of people together in the Chinatown. Likewise, William Yu in Kamwai Dim Sum in Vancouver, his family could easily take their frozen dim sum business, move out to Richmond, Surrey, move out to the suburbs, and have a multi-million-dollar, frozen dim sum empire. Mm-hmm. But William and his family they're committed to that neighborhood, and it's not an easy neighborhood to do business in. There are a lot of marginalized folks in that neighborhood, but their business model is community-facing business. So instead of making a business model where we're looking for the tourists, we're looking for the rich people, we're going to charge $50 plates for Asian fusion food, they are making affordable food in a neighborhood that really needs affordable food, be it for the Chinese seniors, but also for the folks of the downtown's east side who are also marginalized. And, and William is very adamant about keeping the prices low in their store, because it's that dignity to be able to pay $2 to feed yourself, and the dignity to be able to pay that from your own pocket that he's giving to the folks in that neighborhood. And also how Kamwai Dim Sum, beyond a family restaurant, is actually an anchor for the entire neighborhood. It brings stability to all the people's lives, all these folks who are facing daily displacement and threats to their everyday livelihood in that neighborhood. Having businesses like this, having a vision not just for their own bottom line, but for the actual neighborhood ecosystem around them, is what Chinatown needs. And giving the small storefronts like Rick spoke about, it gives new entrepreneurship ideas. You don't need a crazy big box store piece of real estate to run a business in Chinatown. You can start a small pop-up. You can do small things. We could give tax incentives to legacy businesses to continue to innovate, to do all those things. Now in the city, you can buy bubble tea anywhere. You can buy Asian groceries anywhere. But where can you have these foods that have been made out of these restaurants and these places for decades and generations? That, to me, is why I want to visit as a tourist the Montreal Chinatown or whatever Chinatown it is. It's to get that local flavor of the local businesses and the people who are part of the community and continue to be so.
You mentioned, we were talking about second generation, and you mentioned William, and he studied opera. And there's a great line in the documentary where he says that, I love what I was doing, but I love my family more. Can you tell us more about William and why he made the decision to take on the family business?
Well, William is amazing. We hear him sing in the film. It was during COVID. He had a mask on, and the editor and I were having problems because it looked like we put a fake soundtrack on him singing. It was so beautiful and amazing.
So we'll have William, and we'll use his voice as a kind of an inspiration and a guide for us in the way we sing, to make those vowels so full and rich and tall. Just to run it right through from the top. Shall we stand, please?
But when William chooses ultimately his family over his opera career, by family, he's not just referring to his father and his mother and his sister. He's actually referring to all of Chinatown, because he grew up in that neighborhood and he has witnessed and seen the changes happening around him. And he's seen his neighbors move away, and he's seen, the grandparents, go out to the suburbs and all of that. And during COVID and prior to that, in the newspaper, there's been stories about Kamwai, and people have come back. And William, on the very, very first day I met him, he told me this amazing story of people coming back and saying, remember me? I used to be your neighbor. So it's so amazing, to be able to, it's kind of like what Long Time No See is trying to do, to create the community back and tie people back to the neighborhood. Like people like William and their family, by deciding to put their roots even deeper into that neighborhood, that's where you create these kind of moments where people can come back and kind of rethink and reimagine Chinatown in a different way.
Or one solution that's discussed in the doc is, designating Chinatowns as cultural heritage sites. What can you say about that? Like, what do you think? Are you open to those ideas? Like, what do you think of that as a concept?
Conceptually, I think it's a great idea, but it's like, or is it too little, too late? I mean, is the other part of what I'm thinking about. I mean, like, it wasn't in. It should have been in place when they did the hearings for 315 Spadina. I mean, that's such a major project, and it's like you haven't thought of this till now. I mean, one of the problems with the Chinatown thing is defining the borders of what is Chinatown versus what is Kensington. Like it's a one big organism. It's all connected, right? So to look at one separate from the other, no, it doesn't really work that way. That neighborhood is like a living, breathing thing, right? But that a little bit of a light bulb went off to say that, oh, there's something here, maybe we better do something about it. Well, about time. But I do worry that it's too little, too late. And then the other aspect about it is like Chinatown in Toronto, because it was moved. I mean, it was in that clip. It showed the area of the original Chinatown, which was around Nathan Phillips Square, where most of the original Chinatown was bulldozed, displaced.
Is it called the Ward or something?
It was the Ward. The Ward was, and I always think a lot of times Chinatowns are near the bus station, right? It's kind of like the Harbor District or something, like it's where all the sleazy stuff happens and all that. And of course, so they tore that all down, moved everybody over to Spadina. So a lot of the buildings date from then, from 60s, 70s buildings and all this. It doesn't have the architectural history. So that, there's a dilemma, like what do you save with that, right? How do you do that? It's a difficult kind of balance, but when you look at culture, it's called an intangible cultural asset. I've been thinking about the words for that because it is intangible, but it's a cultural asset. It's something which is super valuable, but you have to, how do you define that? There used to be all these big banquet halls, and one by one they've all closed. There's like Dim Sum King is left, and then Sky Dragon's left, but all these other ones, they're all gone now. Big grocery stores, there used to be like half a dozen of them, and now it's like two and a half. Like they're all gone. Dap Fong is still there, but there's certain key businesses that they need to be supporting, and they need to be supporting the and giving leadership to the family associations. The family associations, a lot of them own their property as well as will own some other properties, and a lot of times they're renting out to people at below market rents, and they have their tendrils out to try to stabilize the community.
Do they get pressure though to sell?
All the time.
Yeah.
Both from without and from within. A lot of times when you talked about the generational thing, sometimes they're trying to pass it down to the next generation, and the next generation has moved on. They're not in downtown Toronto anymore. They might be out in Markham. They might have moved out of town altogether, and they say, "Oh, just sell." But on the other side of that, with the generational question, all of the ventures that we've done have a huge fan base, or younger people that are trying to come back in from Markham and come back in from all over the place to try to save Chinatowns. There's really an interest of the younger generation within whatever we're doing within this film, within Ventures to Save Chinatown, with the art projects we're doing, things like that. It's become, and that's what gives me real hope. I mean, if it was just a bunch of old people saying, "Oh, let's just save this thing," but like no, the gas in the tank is these young people, and they're like super activist.
You described Chinatown as a living, breathing thing, and you said that there's an emotional attraction to Chinatown. But yet in the film, it's still a line that was kind of shocking to me with the developer who was like, "What's the use of Chinatown? I've never been there." So what do you think needs to be done to kind of to shorten the gap between those two sentiments?
Well, I think, that is kind of, in a way, that gap between folks who have been in Chinatown so long and have family roots there and understand the vibrancy and the community that exists beyond. And it was important for me in the film to go beyond the kind of tourist facade or the storefront in these places, get into the back kitchens, the second store, see the family associations, see, the dragon dances and lion dances and all of this kind of culture and community that happens in these places. But linking that to newer generations and folks living in the suburbs. I mean, I think Rick should talk about this new project that the Long Time No See Collective that we see in the film. They have a new project where Chinatown is literally reaching out to the suburbs to kind of create those links.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Okay, so the byline, I gave you the card on that. The little byline of that is what happens when Chinatown goes to the suburbs. And so we had done 2 projects downtown Chinatown. One, the first Long Time No See project, Mogin Honoi, just like selfies and all that. Then we did one specifically looking at seniors, because seniors are the backbone of the community, and they're really overlooked. And then we had all these beautiful photographs left over, and my wife had done a show out at the Varley Gallery out in Markham, 2010, so she knew some people out there. She said, do you want to display these photos? And they said, no, how about you do a project working with the Markham community? And so we're a downtown group. We're not from that community. We know some people in that community and things like that, but we started extending our relationship from the downtown Chinatown out to that Chinatown, out to those people, and looking at what they're doing, creating culture, creating community out there, and then connecting them to what we're doing downtown. So it's been a dialogue that way, and a huge learning curve from both sections. The response we get from people out there, like a lot of new Chinese immigrants who come here, they have no idea about the history of the head tax, the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act, how all that stuff went down. They have no idea. They have no idea about where that the original Chinatown was at Nathan Phillips Square and got moved over to Spadina. Like a lot of them, it's just, and they have no idea about. They come into some of the family associations, some of the older spaces, and they're like, "Whoa, I didn't know this was here," and it creates that. I mean, it's said that in order to have a future, I mean, this comes from Afrofuturism, right? In order to understand where you are in the future, you need to know where you are in the present. In order to know where you are in the present, you need some understanding of your past. And so for a lot of people, like you were talking about history, if you don't know your history, then it's really hard to project yourself in the future because it's just all made up. It's all based on sand. But to actually understand your roots long term, it gives you such a better understanding of where you are, a better understanding of where you are, especially in Canadian society. Because, you really need that. You really need to know where you came from and take a look at what your ancestors did and how hard they struggled and where we're at now, and understand the context of how you're seen as a Chinese Canadian nowadays.
We have to wrap up our conversation. I mean, we could go on for another half hour, seriously. But I wonder if you could both just give some thoughts on what you think the future holds for Chinatowns across North America. Karen, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, I think for me, it was really important in the film to see this kind of intersection between racism and urban planning, and to see Chinatowns as these kind of microcosms of what is possible in the city. You know, they are the quintessential kind of Jane Jacobs neighborhoods, the 15-minute neighborhood. They're human scale, walkable, affordable, all these kind of things that all urban planners would love to have in the communities that they're building. So I think what's important for me and what I hope for the future is Chinatown, all the amazing things of the history of Chinatown and the vibrancy that's created and the culture and the connections that are built out of that neighborhood are things that can inform the future. It's like, how do we grow those things stronger so they exist into the future in the cities that we're building, instead of kind of wiping everything out with these kind of soulless luxury condo buildings or big box stores. It's like, let's keep the community, and then in and of itself the ecosystem of the neighborhood actually survives.
What about you, Rick?
I'm hopeful in that. I mean, it's two sides, right? Or like, it's like, what did it say? You got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight, right?
Love that.
Right. So it's the same thing. On the one side, sometimes if you look at the whole at 315 Spadina, it's like, oh my God, look what they've done. But at the same time, that, as I said, the response with younger activists that are working at stuff, that Karen has done a film like this. Each one is a tool in the toolbox, right? And so you see this thing as a long-term game. Somebody was from the Jewish community was saying that we left Kensington Market and it's gone now. There's no more delis in Kensington Market, like our histories are racing, and that you still have something there. You're so lucky. You're so lucky. You at least have something left to save. So.
One last question. What's your shirt say?
Oh, So you told us not to wear black. So, so this is my East Chinatown T-shirt a friend of mine gave to me. There's Wong's Ice Cream right in the center.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
So
That's excellent. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
go eat in Chinatown.
We'll go get
Done.
some juice right now.
Twist my arm, why don't you?